In this video, I'm gonna show you how we can create custom seamless normal maps from high poly sculpt in Blender. First of all, let's delete the cube and the lamp from the scene, as we won't need them in the process. Next, we'll create a plane which will serve as our low poly object. Shift-A, Mesh, Plane. What we need is to check Generate UVs button, so it will be automatically unwrapped and we won't need to do it manually. And secondly, we need to look up our dimensions. In this case it's 2 by 2, but it can be any number really, but just remember it and we'll need it later. This is our low poly object. We will be baking from our high poly sculpt by using TexTools add-on. This is a really amazing add-on and it's free. If you haven't used it yet, try it and I'll leave the link to this add-on in the description section of the video. What we need to make this add-on work with our low poly plane is to call it properly. To do this, we'll call it, for example, bake.l. .l being the important part, and this will tell the add-on that this is our low poly model which we will bake our maps onto. Bake is just a name that you give to your baking set. It can be anything really, but be consistent. If you call to your low poly object bake.l, then you should call your high poly objects bake.h, .h being the high poly model, and so on. So I'll leave it at bake.l. It doesn't matter really right now. And what I'll need to do now is to adjust the camera to look exactly to our plane. Now it doesn't look at the plane at all, and it is in perspective mode. We need it to be in orthographic mode first of all. And to do this, we'll go to the camera settings and change the lens from perspective to orthographic. This number here is 7.3, and what it depicts is that if we clear all the rotations and locations of our camera by pressing Alt-R and Alt-G, and then we'll lift the camera higher on the Z-axis. Let's lift it on the 2. I'll change my view now so it can be clearly seen. Let's lift it on the Z-axis to whatever height we need, because it doesn't matter really. In orthographic mode it will only show the square, or in this case it is still rectangular, in this case rectangle, with the side of 7.3 squares in of the grid. And if we look now from the camera by pressing numpad 0, we can clearly see that this is now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7.3 squares. But on the vertical axis, this is much less. And to make it really squarish, we need to go to the render properties and set any square resolution. It can be as low as 4 by 4 pixels. We don't need to render anything in this video, so it is just for convenience and for this frame to be really a square. This percentage also doesn't matter. And if we leave it like this, it will be much bigger than our plane. We'll go to the camera properties, and in orthographic scale we'll change the value from 7.3 to the value of 2. And now only our low polyplane is in the focus of the camera. Everything else is outside, across the borders of this camera. And this really is an unnecessary step, but I think it's rather useful when you can work with your high poly object, high poly sculpt, and then you can just press the 0 button and clearly see what is in your tile and what is not. Then, now that we made it, let's make a high poly object. For the high poly object, we'll use the copy of this low poly plane by pressing Shift D. We'll copy it, and then here in the outliner, let's call it bake.h. as I said, .h being the high poly object from which we get our information for the maps. And now let's lift it also on the z-axis. This number really matters because we'll need it to bake our maps and to set it in the TexTools add-on as the ray distance. So let's lift it to something like 2 units. I press GZ2 and it will lift our plane by 2 units on the z-axis. Now let's make it 2 times bigger than the low poly plane, and this is all relative to the low poly plane. If your low poly plane is in some other dimensions than 2 by 2, then you should change your high poly also. But as my low poly plane is 2 by 2, I'll make the high poly plane 4 by 4. For this, I'll scale it by 2, and then I'll clear by pressing Ctrl A. I'll clear the rotation and scale of this plane. Now tap to Edit mode and add 3 loop cuts from one side to another and 3 loop cuts from the other side. And now we have 4 by 4 square, and 4 polygons inside will be our seamless tile. If we look at it from the camera, we can clearly see that only the polygons we selected are in the focus of the camera. Other polygons are outside of the focus of the camera, and that's exactly what we need. Now our high poly is really ready for sculpting. First of all, what we need to do, we'll need to add a multi-resolution modifier to work with the sculpt. It allows us to go higher or lower by subdivision levels, and yeah, it is meant for sculpting, so we should use it. One more thing that we need to change is to change the algorithm from Catmull-Clark to simple. Why we need to do this is because when we use Catmull-Clark, it will subdivide, but also it will smooth the plane. And if we use simple, it will just subdivide the plane without smoothing it. So in this case, we'll use simple. And you can subdivide this plane to any level you want, really. I'll go for 7. And you can choose any other number. Now it's 500,000 polygons, and I think it's more than enough for the preview purposes. And now I'll just tap to sculpt mode. And what we need to do here is to adjust our plane. Let's first try to sculpt something. And first of all, we see that we are mirroring our brush strokes, and this is not what we want. And to solve this problem, we need to go to the symmetry lock panel, and here in the mirror section, we need to turn off the X mirror. Now, if we sculpt, there will be no mirror, but no tiling either. For the tiling to work, we need to activate it here in the tiling section by pressing X and Y. This will activate the tiling on X and Y axis. Let's try to sculpt again. But now we see, if we go to our camera view, that this repetition is far too frequent. We need to be here to be only one of our brush strokes, not 2 in the same square, and so it is much too frequent. And what really we need to do is to change the tile offset here in this panel symmetry lock to be equal to the side length of this low poly square. So in my case, this is 2. So this tile offset on the high poly plane should also be 2 on the x-axis and 2 on the y-axis. And now, if we try to sculpt something, we see that our seamlessness is perfect, and we don't have this too frequent repetition in the same tile. And that is what we need, because we don't wish this tile to be used only in its half or its quarter. We need to use it as a whole. And that's it, really. Now is the artistic part. You can do whatever you want with this high poly sculpt to use. You can use any brushes, you can use any strokes or any curves, anything you usually use in sculpting. And the good thing is that by setting this plane like so, we don't have to bother about the borders. If we had borders here, then we should worry about how they will look on the baked seamless normal map. Will they have seams or something like that? If we set the high poly sculpt like this, then we don't need to worry about crossing the borders. And actually this is what you want, to cross the borders and to break the repetition, because if you place your details inside of this square, although it will tile, it will also look artificial. You can clearly see, even here you can clearly see the repetition, and this is not good. If you tile your texture many times, it's not good that anybody can see that it's clearly tileable and clearly repetitive. So with this set you can cross the borders and make it less obvious that this is a tileable plane, and really the more you cross the borders and the more random your ornament will be, then the better it will look really. And you can see that this is far less obvious that it's repetitive than the previous model that I did just before that. And yeah, so I'll bake this kind of plane. It can be called, I think, something like stone or something. I will not really do something very fancy here. And what else do we need to do before baking? We need to set high poly sculpt to the smooth shading, either from the pie menu or from the tools panel. And here in the shading section we can just press the smooth button. It will also smooth everything out, and we won't have facets and edges on our baked normal map. That's it. Now we're really ready for baking, and let's start the baking process. Now that our objects are ready, let's bake them. First of all, open a new window. I'll close the tools panel and open the UV image editor. In its tools panel, we see the new tab of TexTools add-on. And here we need two sections. We need the size section, where you can choose the size of your texture which will be baked, and the baking section, where you can choose the map you want to bake and many other options. First of all, let's change the size. I'll make it 1 key. You can use whatever size you want. And then in the map section, I'll choose this one, tangent normal map, which will be baked. And here is the important part. Let's select two of our objects by pressing Shift and right mouse button. It doesn't really matter in which order you will select your objects, but the important part is that they are named properly, and the important part is that here we have no yellow warning signs, and we have the name of our baking set. In this case it's just bake, and this is this part before the dot. And we have one low poly object which is depicted by this cube, and we have one high poly object which is depicted by this sphere. Here's the important part, the ray distance. This is what we measured by lifting the low poly plane, but now this distance is a bit changed because we sculpted the high poly plane, and this distance became higher. And to measure it again, we'll need to go to the front view by pressing 1 on the numpad, and we'll need to start lifting our low poly plane on the z-axis. Look carefully for the horizontal panel. Here it will show the number that you'll need. Press GZ, and when the low poly plane is just above the surface of the high poly plane, remember this number. In this case it's 2.1, I guess, or maybe 2.2. It's better to take the bigger number than to see the mistakes on the normal map, so in this case I'll make it to 0.2. Now select both objects again, and in the ray distance set this value that we just have seen. And now we're ready to bake the map. For the edges of our normal map not to be jagged, we need to set anti-aliasing to any other option other than none. And then we are ready to bake. Let's select both objects again and press bake. It will take time to bake this map properly, but not so long because it's rather small texture, 1 key, and that's it, it's ready. Let's check for the mistakes in the normal map. I think it looks pretty good, and let's test it. Just duplicate your low poly plane and place it somewhere on the side, and we can select the cycles renderer from the menu here, and TexTools add-on gives us the opportunity to preview the texture right now. And if we click this preview texture button, it will apply it to this plane, but it applies it to the color channel of the diffuse shader, and we need it to be, of course, in the normal input of the diffuse shader or any other shader for that matter. So that's why we'll need to go to the node editor and insert the vector normal map node between the image texture with the normal map and the diffuse shader in this case, and we'll need to input it into the normal socket of the diffuse shader. And of course the important part, as with all the normal maps, is to change this color space of the image texture from color to non-color data. This will apply them properly to this plane, and we can choose whatever color we want. I'll change this shader to principal shader by pressing Shift S. Oh, I forgot to activate the screencast keys, sorry. And now we need to reapply the normal map to the appropriate socket, and we can change here the base color for texture. Then we can set it to metallic or non-metallic, of course, and roughness to be rough or not, or to be more glossy like this one. I'll leave it as it was on the 0.5 value, and let's check it on the render. I'll press Ctrl B to limit the area of the render and press Shift Z to preview it. We have no light sources in our scene, so it's absolutely dark. Let's add the sun lamp here and make it more brighter. And in the property section I will emphasize the strength of this sun lamp so we can clearly see the texture. And here is how it looks. We can, of course, as I said, change the base color so it will be darker or brighter, but we now are checking only the normal map and it looks good. Now let's check if it's seamless or not and if it does have seams. Let's press Alt D, X and 2 to duplicate it by the 2 blender units on the X axis, and let's select both of these planes and duplicate them on the Y axis by 2 blender units also. And let's see how it looks in the rendered view. And if we turn on the view from the above by pressing numpad 7, and I'll make it full screen, we can see that it looks really good. And if we try to find seams on our normal map, first let's see where we would have them. For example, here, where one plane is separated from the another. And here we have no seams. So this map now can be used to create any material, or it can be used on its own if you want to have some surface, some surface ornament or some surface relief. And yeah, really that's it. This is how you can use it. And of course, don't forget to save this image, because Blender doesn't save baked images automatically, and you can lose it if you just press file revert without saving it. Then this file will be lost, and you'll need to rebake the textures again. And yeah, just press image, save as image, and save it anywhere on your hard drive if you need to use it later. And in this manner you can also bake any other texture maps that are presented here. This is only an example from what you can achieve with the help of this add-on and this setting. So now you can create your own customized normal maps and use them for your projects, like tileable pieces, and for anything in your environment, really. I hope it was useful, and I'll see you in the next video.